The box had been sitting on the gift table for 3 hours before my stepmother picked it up. It was small, the kind of box that holds a watch, or maybe a bracelet, brown cardboard, a little dented at one corner, tied with kitchen twine because my grandmother never owned a single ribbon in her life. My grandfather had carried it inside himself, tucked under his arm, and set it down quietly among the white envelopes and silver-wrapped packages without saying a word to anyone. I noticed it the moment he walked in. I always noticed when he walked into a room. The reception was at the Hartwell Estate, a venue my stepmother had chosen because it had 16-foot ceilings and a terrace that photographed well. 240 guests. Open bar, a 4-piece string quartet that played through the cocktail hour and then handed off to a DJ who cost more than my first car. My husband Joel had wanted something small, his parents' backyard, his aunt's potato salad, the kind of wedding you actually remember, but by the time we got engaged, my father had already promised my stepmother a wedding worth talking about, and that was the end of that conversation. Joel squeezed my hand under the table when the toast started. He could tell I was already tired. My grandfather gave his toast, third, after my father and my new father-in-law. He stood up slowly. He was 79 and had bad knees but refused to cane, and he tapped his glass once and waited for the room to settle. He didn't use notes. He just looked at me from across the room with his pale gray eyes and said, "I have watched this girl grow up with less than she deserved and more grace than anyone had a right to expect. She knows what she's worth. She always did. Even when no one else bothered to tell her." Half the room applauded. My stepmother smiled without showing her teeth. After the toasts during the dinner service, my grandfather made his way to our table and set the small brown box in front of me. "Don't open it here," he said quietly. "Put it somewhere safe and open it when you're alone." I looked up at him. "What is it?" He just patted my hand. "Something I should have given you sooner." I slipped the box into my bridle bag, the small beaded clutch I'd carried all night, and I didn't think about it again until my stepmother appeared at my elbow 40 minutes later. She had a way of appearing. That was the only word for it. She never walked up to you. She materialized, already mid-sentence, already holding a glass of something. "I noticed your grandfather left you something," she said. "A small gift," I said. "Can I see it?" I hesitated. Later, I would ask myself why I hesitated instead of simply saying no. I think it was the training of a lifetime, the years of being 13 in that house, learning that hesitation was the safest response, that a flat refusal cost you something you might need later. I took the box out of my clutch and held it in my palm. She reached for it before I'd offered it. It was just a savings passbook. Old, the kind banks stopped issuing decades ago. The cover faded to the color of old grass. The name on the front was mine, my full legal name, the name my mother gave me before she died, the name my father had always said out loud like it tasted wrong in his mouth. My stepmother flipped it open. I watched her eyes move over the page once. Then she closed it. "Old account," she said. "Probably closed." "Probably," I said. I reached out my hand for it. She gave it back. But something had shifted in her face. Something very small. Like a door closing behind her eyes. I noticed it. I filed it away without knowing why. I put the passbook in my clutch and didn't think about it again until we were home. Joel was asleep by the time I sat down at the kitchen table with the passbook and my laptop. I didn't know what I was looking for. The account number was printed at the top in faded blue ink. The bank name, First Landmark Savings, a regional bank that had been acquired and reacquired twice since the account was opened, was printed across the cover. The date the account was opened, March 1988. The month I was born. There had been a single deposit. The amount was listed in handwriting so old it took me a moment to read it correctly, $4,500. I stared at that for a long time. My grandfather had opened an account in my name the month I was born and deposited $4,500. That was all. One deposit, no withdrawals. I did the math in my head, and then I did it again on my phone because I didn't trust the first number. $4,500 in a federally insured savings account, compounding interest for 32 years, depending on the rate and the institution's history. I was looking at something in the range of maybe $25,000. Meaningful but not life-changing. Then I noticed the second page. There had been reinvestment transfers, automatic ones, beginning in 1994, moving the balance into a CD ladder. The CDs had rolled over, again and again and again, for 30 years. The last balance listed in the passbook, the last entry before the pages ran out, was from 2009. I searched the bank's name. First Landmark had been acquired by Central Valley Bank in 2011, which had merged with Horizon Federal Savings in 2018. Horizon Federal was still operating. I wrote down the account number. I wrote down every number on every page. Then I put the passbook in the zippered pocket of my suitcase underneath a sweater, and I went to bed. I didn't sleep much. The branch manager at Horizon Federal was a woman named Helen who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had a framed photo of a golden retriever on her desk. I had called ahead, explained that I had an inherited account with old paperwork, and she had told me to come in on Thursday morning when she had time. I brought everything: my ID, my birth certificate, the passbook, and a copy of my grandfather's original account agreement that he'd mailed to me the week before. I hadn't known what it was when I opened the envelope, just a piece of paper that said First Landmark Savings at the top, and I'd almost recycled it. Helen looked at the passbook for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called someone. Then she called someone else. I sat in the chair across from her desk and watched her face and tried to keep my breathing even. She put down the phone. "I'm going to need you to stay for a little while," she said. "Is that all right?" "Yes," I said. "Can I get you some water?" "Please." She was gone for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock above her door. When she came back, she had a younger man with her. He introduced himself as the branch's compliance officer, and he was carrying a printed document that was several pages long. "The account is active," Helen said. "Active," I repeated. "It was converted to an interest-bearing money market account during the Central Valley acquisition. The balance at that time was transferred in full." She paused. "The current balance." She slid the document across the desk toward me and pointed to a number near the bottom of the first page. I looked at it. I looked at it again. "I need you to say that number out loud," I said. "I'm sorry, I just need to hear it." Helen said the number. It was not $25,000. It was not $50,000. After 3 decades of compounding returns and a strategic reinvestment structure my grandfather had set up through a trust arrangement I barely understood, the account held just over $1.3 million. My grandfather had given me at my birth, the kind of gift that took 30 years to become what it was always meant to be. I cried in Helen's office. She handed me a box of tissues without comment and gave me as long as I needed. I didn't tell anyone. Not Joel. Not right away. Not for 2 weeks. Not until I had spoken to an estate attorney and understood exactly what I was holding and what it meant and what my rights were. The account was a Taunton trust, named solely for me. My grandfather was listed as the grantor. Under the structure he'd established, I was the sole beneficiary and had been since birth. No other party had any legal claim on the funds. No other party. The attorney, a small, precise woman who practiced out of an office above a dry cleaner in downtown Hartford, looked at me over her glasses when I said those words back to her. "That's correct," she said. "The trust is unambiguous. Even if someone tried to claim they had a stake in it." She looked at me for a moment. "Is someone trying to do that?" "Not yet," I said. I went home and told Joel. He sat very still at the kitchen table while I explained it. He's an engineer. He likes things in order, in sequence, and he doesn't react until he has all the information. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Does your father know?" "I don't think so," I said. "But my stepmother saw the passbook at the wedding." Joel looked at the table. Then he looked at me. "How long before she tells him?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe she already has." We found out 4 days later. My father called on a Tuesday afternoon. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to it standing in the parking lot of my gym. He was cheerful. That was the first sign. My father is not a cheerful man by nature. He is efficient, transactional, and when he wants something from you, he becomes warm in a specific way that has nothing to do with warmth. He said he'd been thinking about investment opportunities. He said he'd been talking to some people about a real estate development project. something in the Hartford suburbs, high yield, the kind of thing that required a cash-forward partner. He said he thought I might be interested given my financial situation. He used those exact words. Financial situation. I stood in the parking lot for a long time after the message ended. Then I called my attorney. The calls escalated over the following 3 weeks. My father went from cheerful to earnest to, eventually, a kind of controlled pressure that I recognized from childhood. The voice he used when he'd already decided how things were going to go and was simply waiting for me to agree. He'd found out the amount. I didn't know whether my stepmother had done more research after the wedding, or whether someone at the bank had said something they shouldn't have, or whether my grandfather himself had mentioned it. But he knew. Your grandfather's intention was always to support the family, he said during a call in week 3. The trust was a vehicle. It was never meant to be hoarded. It's not hoarded, I said. It's a savings account. You have a responsibility. To whom? He paused. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Your grandfather is an old man. He doesn't always understand the full picture. The development project, the investment, would benefit everyone, including you. I don't want to invest in your development project, I said. I'm not asking, he said. The line went quiet. I think we're done with this conversation, I said. He called back 4 times that day. I didn't answer. What happened next took me a while to fully piece together, and even now, some of the details I only know from the documents my attorney later obtained. My father had, at some point in the weeks following our last phone call, retained a lawyer of his own. That lawyer had filed a claim challenging the Totten Trust structure on the grounds that my grandfather lacked the mental capacity to execute a valid trust at his age, despite the fact that the trust had been established in 1988, when my grandfather was 47 years old and by all accounts in perfect health. The claim was thin. My attorney said so immediately, and when I asked her to characterize its chances, she used the word frivolous, and then immediately clarified that she meant that in the legal sense. But it didn't need to succeed to cause damage. Legal challenges cost money. They take time. They create uncertainty. My father knew that. He had always known how to use process as pressure. I also learned, through a phone call with my grandfather himself, that my father had visited him twice in the 2 weeks prior, something that had not happened in years. My grandfather told me about those visits quietly, in the careful way he had when he was making sure I understood something without saying it outright. He asked me to sign something, my grandfather said. Did you? No. Did he leave a copy? He took it with him. I called my attorney. She called an elder law specialist. We arranged for my grandfather to have independent legal representation within the week. Then I called my husband. It's time, I said. Tell me what you need, he said. My cousin Diane had been in family law for 9 years and had, in her words, seen everything. When I explained the situation to her over the phone, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, He filed a capacity challenge on a 30-year-old trust? Yes. While the grantor is still alive and clearly competent? Yes. And he visited the grantor to obtain a signature? Yes. Okay, she said. I have some thoughts. Diane's thoughts turned out to be precise and well organized. She put me in contact with a forensic accountant who had worked on estate fraud cases. She also put me in contact with a former colleague who now worked in the Connecticut Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit. I want to be clear about something. I did not set out to destroy my father. I set out to protect what my grandfather had given me, and to make sure that my grandfather himself was protected. Everything that followed came from that, and from the trail my father had already left. The forensic accountant spent 6 weeks reviewing the records my father's attorney had submitted in the capacity challenge. What he found, in the course of that review, was a pattern that had nothing to do with me. Over the previous 4 years, my father had diverted funds from a family LLC, one that held rental properties my grandfather partly owned, into a series of personal accounts. The amounts were not small. The LLC's other members, including a great-uncle and 2 cousins I barely knew, had no knowledge of the transfers. It was not a small mistake. It was not an accounting error. It was embezzlement, and it had been going on long enough to be very, very well documented. My father's sister, My Aunt Roberta had been estranged from the family for 6 years over a dispute I had never fully understood. When I called her, she picked up on the second ring. "I know why you're calling," she said. "Do you?" "I've been waiting for it," she said. "Do you?" "I've been waiting for it," she said. "I've been waiting for someone to see it." She had records, her own records from before the estrangement, bank statements, meeting notes, a chain of emails she had saved to a hard drive and never deleted. She emailed them to me the same afternoon. I forwarded everything to my attorney and to Diane and to the forensic accountant, and I waited. The family had a habit of large gatherings at Thanksgiving. My father's house, 30 people, a tradition going back to when I was small. My stepmother organized it with the kind of precision she applied to everything, the seating chart, the menu, the specific sequence in which dishes were brought out. I had not attended in 4 years, since the first Thanksgiving after my mother died, and my stepmother rearranged the house to remove every photograph. This year, I said I would come. Joel drove. We didn't talk much on the way. It was cold, that particular gray November cold that sits in your chest, and the roads were wet. I held my coffee with both hands and watched the exit signs pass. "You're sure?" Joel said when we were 10 minutes out. "I'm sure," I said. We pulled into my father's driveway at 4:15. The house was already full. I could see people moving behind the lit windows. My grandfather's car was in the driveway, which meant he had gotten there early, which meant someone had picked him up, which meant my father had wanted him there before I arrived. I knew that. I had planned for it. My grandfather met me at the door. He looked at me for a long moment, and I looked at him, and then he put his hand on my arm very briefly and said nothing. Inside, my father was charming. He introduced Joel to people who already knew Joel. He refilled drinks, he stood at the head of the kitchen island, and talked about the development project with the specificity of someone who had been practicing. My stepmother moved through the room with her particular efficiency, adjusting, rearranging, managing. Dinner was served at 6. It was during dinner, the main course, when the table was loud enough that individual conversations were half private, that my father set down his fork and looked at me. "I spoke to my attorney this week," he said. "I think we're very close to a resolution." "That's interesting," I said. "Which resolution?" He smiled. "The trust matter." I said. He picked up his fork again. "I think once things are properly structured, once we're all protected, you'll see it's the right outcome." I looked across the table at my grandfather. He was looking at his plate. "I have something I want to share with the table," I said. My father looked at me. "Just a few things," I said. "I'll keep it short." The table quieted the way tables do when someone's voice changes register. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I had rehearsed this, not the words exactly, but the state of being, the steadiness. I had practiced being still. I explained the LLC transfers. I named the amounts. I named the dates. I said the name of the financial crimes unit that had opened a review 3 weeks prior. And I said that my attorney had been cooperating with that review. And I said that the documents submitted in the capacity challenge had, perhaps ironically, been what drew the original attention to the discrepancy. I did not editorialize. I stated facts. I let the facts be what they were. My father's face changed in stages. First the smile, which held longer than I expected. Then something careful. Then something I didn't have a name for. Not quite anger, not quite fear. Somewhere between the two, the expression of a man who has spent a long time being the one who sets the terms, realizing that the terms have changed. "You had no right," he started. "The LLC's other members had every right," I said. "They filed separately. I was not the first." The table was very quiet. My stepmother stood up. She said something about dessert. It was, under the circumstances, a remarkable thing to say. My grandfather looked up from his plate. He looked at me, and for just a moment, he smiled. Not a wide smile, not a triumphant one, just a small, private one that I think no one else at the table saw. I saw it. The capacity challenge was dropped 6 weeks later. The Financial Crimes Review concluded the following spring, and I won't detail the outcome except to say that my father's attorney negotiated on his behalf and that restitution was made to the LLC's members, including my grandfather. My grandfather gave a formal statement to the investigators. He was clear, specific, and entirely composed. His attorney told me afterward that he had been, in her words, the best witness she had ever seen. He is 80 now. Last summer, he and I drove up to Vermont for a long weekend. Just the two of us, like we used to when I was young, before things got complicated and then stayed complicated for a long time. We stayed at an inn outside of Burlington and ate breakfast at the same diner 2 mornings in a row and took long walks along the river path even though his knees were bothering him and he refused to slow down. On the last morning, sitting on the inn's porch with coffee, he said, "I always knew you'd be okay." "You couldn't have known that," I said. "I knew you," he said. "Same thing." I thought about that small brown box, tied with kitchen twine. I thought about my name printed in faded ink on a passbook from 1988. I thought about a man who had looked at a newborn and decided, quietly, without ceremony, to give her something that would take 30 years to be ready. I didn't say anything. The river was loud that morning. We sat there until the coffee was gone and the sun had fully cleared the tree line. And then he said he was ready for breakfast, and we went inside. I think about my grandfather tying that box with kitchen twine. No ribbon, no card, just a piece of string and 32 years of patience. He didn't make a speech about it. He didn't explain himself. He just set it on the table and trusted that eventually I would find my way to it. That's the part that stays with me. There's a version of this story where I never open the box, where I believe my stepmother when she says, "Old account, probably closed," and I slip it back into my clutch and forget about it. I almost did. The training of a lifetime almost worked on me that night. The training that said, keep your head down, don't make a scene, let the people who speak loudly have the room. I had been practicing that kind of smallness since I was 13 years old, and I was good at it. But here's what I've come to understand. The choices that shaped this outcome were made long before the wedding. My grandfather made one when I was born. A quiet, deliberate act of care that asked for nothing in return and announced itself to no one. He did it because he believed that integrity doesn't need an audience. He did it because doing right by someone isn't contingent on whether they'll thank you or whether anyone will ever know. My father made his choices too. Over years. Small ones at first, probably. A transfer here. An assumption there. The slow accumulation of a man who convinced himself that the rules applied to everyone else. By the time he walked into my grandfather's house to ask for a signature, he had already built a version of reality in which his own desires were indistinguishable from what was fair. That's the thing about dishonesty that no one tells you. It doesn't announce itself. It compounds quietly, the same way interest does, until the balance is something you couldn't have imagined at the start. I didn't outmaneuver my father because I was clever. I mean, I tried to be careful. I tried to think clearly. I leaned on people who knew more than I did. But the reason things turned out the way they did is simpler than strategy. The truth was already there. The records existed. The transfers had happened. My aunt had kept her emails. The forensic accountant just had to read what was already written. I didn't construct an outcome. I just stopped getting out of the way of one. What I know now at 32, that I didn't know at 13, endurance is not the same as passivity. Staying quiet and staying ready are completely different things. I spent years thinking I was just surviving my father's house, but I was also watching, filing things away, learning what integrity looked like by observing its absence. Joel saw me clearly from the beginning. My grandfather saw me clearly from before I was old enough to see myself. The people who invest in you quietly, not for credit, not for return, just because they believe in who you are, those people are telling you something about your own worth. It took me a long time to hear it. I sat on that porch in Vermont last summer and I thought, this is what he always meant for me. Not just the money, the morning, the river, the not having to fight anymore. He gave me a foundation 32 years ago, and he was patient enough to wait until I was ready to stand on it. I hope I remember that the next time I'm tempted to stay small.